Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day today. Today, we're going to be taking a look at one of the most interesting upper receivers that I've ever had the pleasure of playing around with. Now, this is the Kawaii Mini 5-inch 556 upper receiver from Ktactical. But of course, before we get into specifics on the Kawaii Mini 556, if you want to help the channel out personally, you can of course like, share, and subscribe, as all that is free and does help us out quite a bit. Also, go ahead and comment your loudest shooting experience in the comments down below. Now, full disclosure on the Kawaii Mini 556 from Ktactical, I've worked with Ktactical in the past. I did a belt review for them several months ago, and then they reached out to me again and said, hey, do you want to check out one of our 556 upper receivers, specifically the 5-inch version? So this is not my upper receiver. They sent it out for testing and evaluation. However, they did pay for all of the ammunition, body armor for the 3A body armor testing that we'll get into later on in the video. So all of the ammunition, I bought 1,000 rounds of PMC X-Tac, so just 55 grain M193, and then some other ammunition as well for, again, the body armor penetration as well as the body armor panel. All of that was provided for by Ktactical. So while I don't really have a relationship with any of the specific companies of the components that we'll be reviewing as the whole of this upper receiver, I do have a relationship with ATC, and again, they did pay for all of the testing. Now, getting into specifics on this guy, this is indeed a 5-inch 556. So what that means is you get perhaps the shortest, loudest, most obnoxious, least usable 556 upper on the market. However, I will say, well, of course, to get this out of the way at the beginning, this is not a serious upper receiver. This is not something I would employ in any sort of serious condition outside of perhaps a bag gun. But even as a bag gun, there are a variety of different calibers and barrel lengths that will do the same job in a more efficient manner, let's say. So while this is, and honestly, a very fun upper receiver to shoot in certain ways, this is not what I'm going to consider a serious duty use upper receiver, even though it performed quite well in the 1,000+ rounds that we put through it. We'll get into all of that, but just to kind of cut off everybody before they get going on it, this is not a serious upper receiver, at least in my personal opinion. Now, the second thing that we need to talk about before we get into the specific component list on here is that this upper receiver is very expensive. I believe just the upper receiver as you see it with all the accoutrements, the Surefire muzzle device, as well as the Warden, light, and optic. This is the Holosun HS503CU, which is a fairly decent high-value optic. All of this comes in at $2,000. I believe it is $2,000 flat on their website. So while it is a bit of a conversation piece, it's also very expensive. So just to get those two things out of the way, now we can talk about the individual component list. Now, other than two components, everything on here is actually extremely high quality, and what you would think would be a meme upper receiver, while it may be odd in terms of its barrel length, all of the individual components, again, except for two, are actually extremely high quality. So starting off with the front, we might as well go tip to butt on this one. This is a Surefire Warden, which is basically a QD blast forwarding device. And with this installed, it made the 5-inch 556 upper receiver usable and shootable without causing undue damage to the shooter. A 5-inch 5.56 has an insane amount of blast, concussion, flash. Especially, I did do a little bit of shooting without the blast shield on, without the Warden on, so just this Surefire Socom Brake. And it was extremely unpleasant. It hurt to shoot. You felt it in your teeth when you pulled the trigger. Very, very unpleasant. With the Warden installed, it was actually, I wouldn't say pleasant to shoot, but it was definitely doable and something that even if I shot 200, 300, 400, 500 rounds at a time with it, it wasn't something that I was experiencing undue amounts of comfort. It is still going to be insanely loud, blasty, all of those sorts of things, but with the Warden installed, it definitely does take it down a notch. Now moving back to the rail, this is actually the Slr Ion Rail, so it is a 4.25 inch rail. Again, extremely high quality with a taper lock, a dual taper lock on the bottom, and then it has an anti-rotation tab up top that works off of the gas tube itself. Not necessarily my favorite way of stopping rotation on a handguard, but it does work quite well, and the handguard itself is actually very expensive. I think SLR charges $250 for a 4-inch handguard. It is, again, a very nice handguard. It's just also very expensive. Now, on the inside, we have a 5-inch 5.56 barrel. It is titanium nitride, which is an excellent coating. It is something that is incredibly durable, incredibly heat resistant, lubricious, very hard, all of the good things you could want in a coating. Now, on the website, I couldn't figure out who the exact manufacturer was, and I couldn't see the twist rate either. I'm assuming it's a 1 in 5 or a 1 in 7, and it has what looks to be a micro-length gas port size. Now, the barrel itself, we'll get into barrel testing later in terms of accuracy and stability, because a lot of times when you get a 5.56 this short, you are no longer able to stabilize certain projectiles, so you can get keyholing where the round begins to tumble at, say, 25 or 50 yards. Slight spoiler alert, in this upper receiver, we actually did not experience any tumbling out to 50, 70 yards or so. Now, longer distances, 100 or 200 yards, would certain rounds remain stable? That one there, I really can't say. Now, the gas block is a SLR, again, a very high quality gas block, Slr Adjustable Gas Block. It was tuned from the factory for the 100% flow setting. SLR gas blocks work a little bit differently. They are, again, very nice. This one here is even pre-tapped for a pin. It is not pinned. The barrel is dimpled and the gas block is set in the dimple. The only thing that I had to do to this upper receiver throughout the 1,000 rounds was tighten down the gas block, as I did notice the gas block screws had started to loosen up a little bit, torqued them down, and we were good to go. It is definitely something I would like to see rock set or high temperature thread locker applied to the gas block set screws, as with a upper receiver this compact with the chamber and gas block about an inch away from each other, you're definitely going to need something, because that is a lot of heat in the same area, and of course a lot of blast, concussion, all that sort of terrible stuff going on with a 5.56 upper receiver, that you're definitely going to need to secure your gas block either via a pin, which again the gas block is pre-tapped for a pin, or of course some sort of high temperature thread locker rock set on the gas block screws. Now, on the bottom of the handguard, it also does come with the SLR hand stop, which again, on something this short, you're definitely going to want a hand stop to make sure that you don't accidentally go forward. Now, the Warden also effectively increases the barrel length, but if you are using it without the Warden or a different muzzle device installed, you're definitely going to want to have something there that stops your hand from going forward and getting blown off, because that muzzle brake, if you manage to get your finger next to it while firing, would probably remove your finger. Now, getting into the first component that I think that they should switch out, this is actually one of their Ktactical branded lights. It does actually use Surefire style switches. Now, it is unfortunately a knockoff. I think they charge like $85 for it with the tape switch. Now, the light output and the tape switch is fine. It seems to me to be anywhere from 300 to 500 lumens. Personally, I would just swap that out with a Streamlight HLX or something similar to that. It is a very high quality light that comes with a tape switch, everything that you need, and doesn't really increase the price over what they're charging for their specific light. Again, their light is fine and it worked fine. Didn't have any issues even with the excessive heat that we were able to build up on the upper receiver. Still works just fine. Tape switch is perfectly adequate. The light itself is, while small, it's kind of a Surefire Scout clone, if you will, just some overseas made clone of a Surefire light. It's fine. Its light output is nothing tremendous. It is usable, but again, for around the same money, you can get a much more powerful light that probably has a little bit better track record, durability, that sort of stuff, and again, doesn't really cost you any more money. Now, moving back from there, the upper receiver itself is a very nice billet upper receiver. It looks good. The aesthetics are there if you like that sort of thing. It is a bit of a thick boy, and it is going to add a few ounces. However, we are talking about a 5-inch 5.56, so size and weight constraints aren't necessarily your priority on a 5-inch 5.56. It is going to add an ounce or two, but it's not really a big deal. Now, on the inside, the second half of the heart and soul of your upper receiver, this is actually a F1 titanium nitride bolt, and F1 is one of those companies that's proud of their products. They usually charge anywhere from $200 to $275 for their titanium nitride bolts. Now, you might not notice it just by looking at it, because I just cleaned it today, because it was absolutely disgusting, which we'll talk about in a minute. But this carrier does seem to be brand new, even after 1,000 rounds of firing. I cleaned it up. Titanium nitride cleans extremely easily. It's extremely hard. It's extremely lubricious, heat resistant, all the good things that you could want. The bolt, I believe, is 9310. Nothing really special about it. It is kind of just a mil-spec style BCG with perhaps one of the best, if not the best, coatings on the market in titanium nitride. Now, not only is the carrier and the bolt coated in titanium nitride, but the bore of the carrier itself is actually chrome plated. Now, chrome plating versus titanium nitride, you could completely chrome plate your bolt. You really don't need to do that. The most important place is on the inside of the carrier. Titanium nitride, again, even after 1,000 rounds with a lot of heat getting built up, it looks nearly brand new. There is almost no wear in any place on the bolt. The gas rings themselves are holding up just fine. Something I do note about titanium nitride and chrome is that the gas rings tend to wear out a little bit faster just because of how hard those coatings tend to be, and so they will wear actually faster on your gas rings. And we were not kind to this upper receiver whatsoever. The last range outing that we had, I think we put just under 500 rounds through it in a single range trip, and we got it extremely hot, extremely uncomfortable to touch or even be around. So while this is my first experience with F1 BCGs, this one here held up extremely well. Again, titanium nitride as a finish is the best or second best coating depending on who you're talking to, and it will hold up extremely well for a very long period of time, show very, very minimal wears. Again, it is one of the best coatings on the market. Unfortunately, everything else on the bolt held up as well. Now, the second component that they should probably switch out, and again, my opinion, is their bat charging handle. Now, while it is ambidextrous and very oversized, which does make it quite easy to use when you're charging the gun or clearing a malfunction, the problem with this charging handle is that it is not made to the highest standards in terms of the springs and how it locks onto the upper receiver. This is also the second charging handle of theirs. So they had one on the upper receiver when it came in, one in the box. The first one disassembled itself during firing, which was a little bit obnoxious. This one here has not done that, but you will notice in some of the footage that the springs that are used to keep it to the upper receiver are just very weak. So it tends to come back flying at my face about 20% of the time. Not my favorite thing. And again, there are very high quality charging handles on the market that you can get that aren't going to increase the cost of the upper receiver, provide a better value, be a little bit more durable, rugged, that sort of thing. So while I do understand for marketing purposes why you want to have your own charging handle that has your logo on it, has your little face on it because it's cute, that sort of thing. I get it for marketing purposes. However, for actual usability, there are just a lot better charging handles already on the market, and you can just buy one of those better charging handles that doesn't cost any more money and then pay somebody $5 to engrave 1,000 of them, and then you're off to the races with your own. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the optic choice that they went with on here is the Holosun HS503CU. It is an optic that I have reviewed in the past. It does all of the Holosun things. So it's the 500 series, which gives you the 2 MOA dot and 65 MOA outer circle. This one here has the side loading battery tray with the rubber buttons on the side and the solar fail-safe on top, meaning that if the battery died and you had access to adequate sunlight, it will still provide a usable reticle in certain circumstances. It is not necessarily a gimmicky feature, as it does work, but it's one of those things where you're dealing with a battery life with 50,000 hours of battery life, supposedly with auto on, auto off. So the battery isn't going to die for 2 to 5 years, depending on how much you use it. So you can swap out your battery every year. And that solar failsafe, again, is nice, and it is something that does work in certain circumstances. It's just probably not something that you need. Again, the Holosun 503CU, the only weak point on it is the base mount. But you can swap out the base mount for just any T1, T2 style mount that you like, and you'll be good to go. Now, there are a couple other things that we need to talk about in conjunction with the upper receiver itself. They have a kit above just the upper receiver, which is like the ultimate kit. It basically has everything in it, including an 80% lower. Now, what they sent out for me personally was the buffer tube kit and the trigger that they sell in their ultimate kit. The trigger that they sell in the ultimate kit is the AR Gold ATC, and it is a fantastic trigger in many ways, one of the best triggers that I've ever felt personally. However, we did have 2 malfunctions with this gun, nothing related to the upper receiver, both of them having to do with the trigger. So the trigger itself is excellent, as I mentioned before. It has a 0.8 pound take up and about maybe 3 pounds of total pull, The reset, while incredibly short, is very soft, very soft, which we'll get into in just a minute. So getting into, again, the pull, about 0.8 pounds, a little bit of take up. You hit a very hard wall with absolutely no creep, and then you have a very light 3 pound total pull. Again, for putting shots exactly where you want them, it works great. If you can set up on that wall and you have very good trigger discipline, you can absolutely break shots, again, exactly when you want them to be very, very precise. In terms of a precision trigger, it's one of the best that I've ever felt on any gun, even like a precision rifles and such like that. Very, very good trigger. The reset is incredibly short, but it's not really forced at all. It kind of just very slowly moves forward, which was a bit of an issue. So the 2 issues that we had with the trigger is that, one, during a string of fire in the first 200 to 300 rounds, I had a hammer follow. So basically everything was, the upper receiver was doing its job, cycling perfectly. New round in the chamber, live round in the chamber, dead trigger. And all I had to do was halfway charge the gun again, trigger went live again, and then I could continue to work. So we did have one odd issue with the trigger not resetting properly. Again, the upper receiver functioned flawlessly, put a new live round in the chamber. It's just that the trigger was dead for whatever reason. Not sure what the exact issue is there, as the AR Gold ATC trigger does use a very unique operating system, if you will. It's a little bit different, which allows it to feel so good, but it does, from what I've seen, tend to be a little bit more finicky. The second issue that we had was a light primer strike. Now, you get a trigger with a very, very lightened pull weight. Usually what that means is you're dealing with some sort of lightened hammer spring or something else that is conducive to a very light trigger pull, however, not very conducive to consistent primer detonation. So we did have one light primer strike as well, reloaded the round, and it went off fine. The second time, it did look like a very, very light strike on the primer itself. So again, something with the firing pin or trigger. In this case, I would lean towards the trigger just because it is so light. So while it might make sense in a 3-gun application, where if you get used to it, you can definitely run it very quickly, and if you take care, maintain it, that sort of thing. But the more dirty and gunked up the upper receiver got, the more I felt like it was a little bit sluggish, slow to reset, which did cause me some issues in certain areas. But again, for 3-gun applications or for precision shooting applications, if you're maintaining a trigger, keeping it cleaned and lubricated, so on and so forth, you're not really going to have an issue. Now, another trick that they have in the back is that they are running their own buffer, which is a 5.4 ounce H3 buffer. It's about as heavy of a buffer as you can go in a standard carbine tube. And on top of that, they use a reduced power spring. So they use a flat wire spring. I'm not sure exactly who makes the flat wire spring, but it also has 2 rings removed from the back of it. So it is a very interesting recoil impulse that allows this upper receiver to cycle and be one of the softest upper receivers on the market. It is very odd shooting it because you think a 5-inch 5.56 is going to have a very violent recoil impulse. So even with full power M193, I was getting very consistent ejection at around 330 to 345. Now, when we got the upper receiver very hot, which we got it very hot multiple times, it would start to get a little bit erratic in terms of its ejection pattern. However, this is a very short upper receiver, a lot of heat in the same area, so a little bit of erratic ejection I can forgive. Now, the recoil impulse is odd, again, so you're using a very heavy buffer to slow down the carrier. and then you're also using a lighter, shorter spring to allow full carrier transportation, because again, you're dealing with not zero dwell time, but right next to zero dwell time on this upper receiver. The gas block, the front of the gas block is about a ½ inch in front of the threads. So again, you're dealing with about as short of a dwell time as you can. So you're really not having much pressure at that port for very much time. You might have a lot of pressure at the port, but it's not going to be there for that long before that bullet leaves the barrel, and then that pressure goes down to zero. So to utilize all that pressure, they have something to slow down the carrier so it doesn't reach maximum velocity, but then they need a weaker spring to allow it to fully cycle and continue to get the system to run. Now, the upper receiver itself, over about 1,100 rounds, about 1,000 rounds, well, exactly 1,000 rounds of PMC X-Tac, their M193 load, and then some other ammunitions that we use for the body armor testing. It was 100% reliable. I didn't have a singular issue, a singular failure to eject, failure to feed, anything like that. And it was a incredibly smooth shooting upper receiver. It was quite odd as a shooting experience, because it was one unpleasant because it's very loud and blasty, even with the Warden on. It is still a loud, blasty upper receiver compared to even like a 10.3, 10.5 upper receiver. However, the recoil impulse was so low and negligible that you could shoot it very quickly, make your shots at different distances, transition, all of that sort of stuff incredibly quickly, because again, this is currently, this is the softest upper receiver in my arsenal, which is kind of a strange thing to say about, again, a 5-inch 5.56 upper receiver. That's, while it's not necessarily a lightweight upper receiver for what it is certainly lighter than just about any other upper out there, just by virtue of how short it is. So somehow the combination of the SLR gas block plus the shortened, weaker spring plus the H3 buffer meant that this upper receiver was an incredibly pleasant upper receiver to shoot in terms of its recoil impulse. Now, getting into some of the other testing and what I mentioned earlier about how dirty this upper receiver got, something to do with the incredibly short gas system length, which is really, the bullet is probably sitting about 1.5 inches away from the gas port on the barrel itself. So you basically get all of that unburnt powder feeding directly back into the upper receiver. That could have also been the culprit for the trigger issues, as the trigger is probably a little bit more fragile, finicky. And there was a ton of gunk on the inside. It was a very, very nasty upper receiver to clean out. Now, again, the bolt did a great job with all of that. Titanium nitride is an incredibly easy material to clean off of, an incredibly easy finish to clean off of, I should say. But again, the upper receiver, because of that very short gas system length, did get incredibly gross very quickly. Even worse than some other guns that I've shot suppressed. This one here got dirtier faster, again, because it's basically has a direct loop right back into the upper receiver every time you pull that trigger, because that gas port is so close to the front of the casing. Now, getting into the accuracy testing and stability testing that we did on this upper receiver, because I was interested to see how a 5-inch 5.56 would do. Could it hold the group at 25 yards or 50 yards? And is it going to start keyholing at those, you know, quote unquote extended distances? And I was actually very happy with both the accuracy and the lack of keyholing, I should say. So at 25 yards, I only had 2 groups to test on that day because I shot through all of the PMC X-Tac earlier in the day because I forgot to save some for the accuracy testing. But with the 40 grain VMAX ammunition, we were able to get about 4 MOA out of the upper receiver, which is perfectly fine. And then I had some atomic laying around as well, some atomic 77 grain ammunition, very, very heavy ammunition. And that shot into the exact same hole at 25 yards. So if you extrapolate that out, maybe that's a 1.5 MOA group from a 5-inch 5.56. Now, realistically, I would say you could probably achieve 2 MOA accuracy, maybe a little bit better than 2 MOA accuracy at 100 yards with this upper receiver, which is pretty darn good for a 5-inch 5.56. At 50 yards, we did test the 40 grain VMAX for stability, and it was perfectly fine. There was no keyholing, no tumbling whatsoever, again coming in at around 4 MOA in total group size. Now, the other shooting that I did with this upper receiver with just the 55 grain ammunition, again at 50 yards, we were not noticing any sort of instability that we could determine on paper. Now, if you push that out further, 75, 100, 200 yards, would those rounds still be stable? We didn't test any of the heavier rounds at longer distances, though we probably should have tested one of those at a bit of a longer distance to see if those would remain stable. But again, inside of its use case envelope, if you will, it did seem to stabilize the 40 to 55 grain projectiles at least out to 50 yards. Now, one of the benefits of 5.56 over like 9mm or even 300 blackout in a 5-inch barrel is that you're still getting more velocity than you would get with either of those projectiles. So 55 grain is coming out at like 2000 FPS, maybe, out of a 5-inch barrel, somewhere around that range, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more. So one of the advantages of 5.56 in theory is that it could still penetrate 3A body armor. That was something that Ktactical, they actually reached out to me after they sent me the stuff. They said, hey, can you also test for the 3A body armor penetration? And I said, sure. So they sent over some money. I bought a 3A panel from Battle Steel. Now, getting into the actual body armor penetration test, we were supposed to test out 4 different loads. Bowtac sent me the wrong ammunition though, so I only had 3 loads to test. So I had 40 grain VMAX, I had 55 grain ball, just that PMC X-Tac 55 grain ball. And then I was supposed to have 62 grain M855 as well to test, but they only sent me M193, so thanks Bowtac for that. And then on top of that, I had some of that atomic 77 grain to see if the slower but heavier projectiles had a chance of going through. So starting off with the first load that we tested was the 55 grain ball. And that round, at 10 yards, actually managed to penetrate just a little bit. There was the tiniest of hole on the back side. The 3A body armor panel from Battle Steel managed to capture most of the round. However, some part of the round did make it through and did penetrate the body armor. Now, next up, we tested 40 grain VMAX, as I thought that ammunition would just fly straight through. But unfortunately, that round has a polymer tip. And with that polymer tip, even at the higher velocity with the, again, the 40 grain VMAX from Pioki, that did not make it through. So that did not penetrate. It did blow out the back a little bit, but it did not penetrate, did not go through whatsoever. And with the 77 grain atomic, much of the same result. While the damage to the plate itself was much greater, it still did not penetrate. So we did 2 rounds. This one here, I believe, was our first one, which did not pass through. You can see it's a little jangled up in here. And then our second round, I believe, was this one right here, and it absolutely blew out the back end. However, the bullet did not penetrate. So it gave its life, as you can see, stopping that bullet, and it tried as hard as it could and held on as long as it could and did manage to stop both of the 77 grain projectiles. So the only one that was a possibility of passing through, because there is a tiny hole on it, was the very first 55 grain ball round. Probably the combination of being harder than the polymer tip while still having better velocity than the 77 grain. Now, I was supposed to have 62 grain M855, which is green tip, which has a mild steel core, which would probably perform the best. However, Bowtac sent me the wrong ammunition, so when I came out today, I just had 55 grain ammunition. So, will 5-inch 5.56 penetrate a 3A body armor panel? Depending on the ammunition, it is certainly possible. Again, we did get not a total pass-through with the 55 grain ball, but we did get some level of penetration with the 55 grain ball. That is probably going to depend, one, on the ammunition specifically, and of course the plate, because not all 3A plates are made equal. So a better, higher quality, still 3A rating plate will probably stop 55 grain ball. Different ammunition choices, M855 or M855A1. Both of those, in my personal opinion, would probably have the best chance of penetrating, even though they're going to be a little bit slower than 55 grain ball. But if I had to place a bet on this upper receiver penetrating a 3A body armor panel, I would probably put my money on M855, or if I had access to it, M855A1, of course. There are also other specialized rounds out there that I'm sure could also get the job done. But in general, M855, or again, if you can find it, M855A1, those are going to give you the best chance of a 5-inch 5.56 penetrating 3A body armor. And now, of course, 5.56 was really never designed to be fired out of a barrel this short. You really are taking everything good about 5.56, which does have a ton of excellent characteristics about it, and you're making those characteristics much less good out of a 5-inch barrel. Out of a 5-inch barrel, there are other calibers that do a similar thing, but better, more efficiently, you could say, like 5.7 by 28 for one, or of course 300 blackout. Now, 300 blackout out of a 5-inch barrel, you are still sacrificing a ton of what you can do with 300 blackout as well. However, it is going to be a more efficient use of a 5-inch barrel than 5.56 will be, as 5.56 really needs at least 10 inches and preferably 20 inches to do all of its expanding fragmentation goodness. Now, with that out of the way, you guys should probably know my thoughts on this upper receiver. This is what I would consider to be a conversation piece or a meme upper receiver. Does it have a real world use case scenario outside of a fun range toy? Probably not. Again, even for a bag gun, there are, in a 5-inch bag gun, I would much rather have, again, 300 blackout or even 5.7. It's going to be a much more efficient caliber for that barrel length than 5.56. Suppressing a 5-inch 5.56 would probably be a nightmare and void your suppressor's warranty. So not a lot that I would do there. Again, while the individual components, barring the light and charging handle, are very high quality, and the shooting experience for me personally was very fun to shoot. This was a very interesting upper to shoot. I'm very thankful that Ktactical sent it out to me. Unless you happen to be in the has a lot of money to burn and also likes meme uppers category, this is probably something you're going to watch the video, laugh at, talk crap about it in the comments down below, and then move on with your day, and that's totally fine. I do think that this was, one, very fun to shoot. Would I pay $2,000 for the privilege of going deaf? Probably not. While it is, again, a very fun, Ktactical was a good sport, sending all the ammunition and the upper receiver out. It was very fun to shoot, again, so there is that aspect to it. So again, it's not really a serious upper unless you're in the very small minority of people that have a lot of money to burn and are also into the meme aesthetics and just the conversation piece that is a 5.56 upper receiver. Now, I did have other people shoot this upper receiver, and it was a blast, no pun intended. They all laughed after shooting it basically just because it is just such an odd experience. It is borderline painful without the warden on. Well, actually, it's not borderline painful. It is painful without the warden installed. Even with the warden, it's not exactly what I would call pleasant. So again, it is a very good conversation starter, a fun range toy for a few minutes, but more than that, I mean, you know, it's a 5-inch 5.56 AR-15 that costs a lot of money. So with all that out of the way, guys, let me know what you guys think of the Ktactical upper receiver in the comments down below. If there's anything else that I should check out in this kind of meme category, let me know as well. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. I will see you in the next one. Peace out.